I was born in Gwanda, in a place called Stanmore, in the Gwanda district. And then from there, but I grew up in Filabuzi, in a district called Slalachan district. And that's where I grew up. And in Gwanda, my father and mother my father was Shadreck Nkala, my mother was Makonde Dube, and but for some reason or another, which I am not aware of, the marriage didn't work. My mother then went back to Filabuzi with me, and then I grew up at my uncle's village at Slalachani. And that's where I grew up with my grandmother, who was Mamoyo. Well, what I remember, my favorite child memories in the district there at Slalachani in Filabuzi was that, we grew up as young people, growing up playing with the other boys there. And my grandmother was really my favorite. She looked after me very well, and really that's all I can remember, is that I was a happy boy growing up, a happy child in this particular big village, in my grandfather's village. When I fell off the tree, I had climbed the tree to get up. I don't know what you call this. It's in the belly, we call it cloud. I think the branch broke, and then I fell off the tree. But anyway, I survived. Got sick, but eventually I recovered. Basically, being hit by lightning was now, I think we're coming from herding cattle, so we brought all the cattle to the kraal and we closed them in, and it was threatening to rain. So I ran to the house, Coco's house, and then I remember I was standing in the door like this, and I don't remember what happened. Actually, I think there was a huge lightning that hit the place, and the house was on fire. But I was thrown out somewhere in the yard, and I didn't quite. I think the other people that were in the house were all pulled out, but me, because I was standing at the door, I was thrown out. I didn't fall inside the house. So that was quite an incident, and then I got sick for quite some time, but eventually recovered. Well, it was quite a traumatic experience, yeah. But I survived it. It was difficult in the village to wish for something, but I did my primary school. I did this particular in the village, and but I finished my primary school at another place called Mkwaveni, another part of Filabuzi district. That's where I completed my standard 6 those days. So, but it was something maybe like 15, 20 kilometers that we used to walk from my village to the secondary school at Mkwaveni. But anyway, when I finished, I eventually was staying with some relatives who were near in the area. The secondary school, yes, and when I finished my primary school at Mkwaveni, a primary school, one of those that did fairly well and was supposed to go to a secondary school in Matopo Mission. And I remember quite well then, actually, my grandmother selling some few cattle for me to get fees to go to the secondary school. And I went to the secondary school at Matopo Mission. It was a mission school, quite very far away from our village. And I remember that we we took buses. There were buses at that time, but we dropped the buses very far away from where the mission was and walked to the mission. That's where I did my secondary education from Form 1. Form 2, I did it quite well, but Form 3 became a problem of getting fees. And because also my grandparents didn't have the money. And this is where the first time I met white people at this mission school. A lady who was one of my teachers there, called Martin, she volunteered to pay for my fees in Form 3 and Form 4. During that time, obviously, it was during the holidays. Then if I used to go home, I used to remain doing bits and pieces of things that they call it at the school for pocket money. And another headmaster, school teacher there, was called J.D. Ndlovu, also contributed in paying my fees for Form 3 and Form 4. Yeah, I think I was one of the bright guys in the stream, my Form 3 and Form 4 in the secondary school anyway. But my teachers seemed to like me very much, so they couldn't see me failing because of fees, failing to continue with education. The first thing, when I finished my Form 4, I went to be a temporary teacher in one of the districts at Ikezi. And I spent a year there. During a holiday, when I came back to Bulawayo, I was staying with a cousin. This cousin of mine was working for the railways. They told us that they were advertising for position for people to be recruited in the railway as firemen. That means trainee drivers. The fireman was a trainee driver. So went with my cousin to go for interview at the Rhodesia Railways by the time. And after the interview, I was successful. We were successful and recruited as a trainee fireman. That was really the start of that way inspired me. You know, the Rhodesia Railways, they had a center which they called train control, a signaling control, which were used to control railways that were going to Harare, railways that were going to Hwange, to Zambia. So, really inspired me very much during this time when I was being trained as a train driver, because this control center used to tell us when we're in the train whether the train should stop or should start, and controlled all the signaling for the railways. And this was quite an inspiration. It really inspired me to also be an engineer, to understand how this thing was working. So after about 2 years of training as a train driver, a friend of mine introduced me. He gave me a paper that was showing that in Pakistan they were looking for training, for people to come, United Nations scholarships, for people to go to Pakistan for training. Of any type, and I was more interested in being trained as an engineer because of the inspiration of what I got at the railways. So I applied for these scholarships and I got the scholarship, and it was good because that I was working for the railways. But this scholarship, the conditions were that you pay for your own transport to Pakistan, which was India. If I was not working for the railway, as a train driver those days, it was the best paying African job to Africans, more than teachers and so on. So as a result, I was able to raise enough money to buy my ticket to go to Pakistan, to to join training there as an engineer. When I got a place in Pakistan for going for a training, this United Nations scholarship, but it did not have transport. So I went to my foreman there, who was the station master at the Bulawayo railway station, with a letter of resignation that I wanted to resign and then go back to school. He said, "You're crazy." Looked at me and said, "You're crazy, you're resigning this job to go and to be trained then you'll come back, we'll employ it as a teacher. Are you crazy?" I said, "No, I'm not crazy. I want to go back to school." So he tore the resignation letter and threw it into the dustbin and said, "If you're serious, go and write another one." So I just went out and wrote another letter, and they brought it to me. He said, then after getting it, he said to me, I think, "Is this political?" I said, "No, there was no politics in it at all." You know, that time, quite a lot of people, the young people were leaving the country and going out to school and so on. Some were going out. Then exposed to the guerrilla warfare. But it was really on the early ages of that development. So anyway, I wrote the letter, brought it back, gave it to him. Then he said, "Okay, fine, I'll process it." I went to Lahore University after finishing the high school there, and they did a 4-year course at Lahore University. I resigned from the railways and bought my ticket on the Rhodesia Airways, and then to travel now to Pakistan. I remember very well that, I was going on the plane for the first time. And this plane stopped in Nairobi, in Kenya, and then from there it proceeded to Pakistan. And it was a very long trip. So when I got there, and I was enrolled at this Pakistan School of Engineering, Pakistan College, but I was to do my A-level type, equivalent to our A-level type training for 2 years there before joining the engineering college. So after finishing the 2 years, I did fairly well. So I was offered 2 opportunities, either to join the doctors colleges or continue with engineering college. I said, no, doctor, I don't want to be a doctor. I wanted to be an engineer. So, okay, then they enrolled me at the Pakistan College of Engineering in Pakistan, which was a 4-year-old course. And I stayed there at the college, it was a boarding school, and finished the 4 years there successfully. During the time I was in Pakistan, really Indian people are very, very, what I noticed, very, very business-minded. That my friends all were coming from Indian rich families, and most of them were business people. So when they used to get some opportunity to go to visit their homes, and you could see that this family, they would tell you that this is a family business that was started by their great-grandparents, and they're still continuing with it. And their children come back to their businesses and so on. And that was quite an inspiration to me, that one day also I will become a businessman. My first job when I finished my degree of engineering was in a company called Philips in Pakistan, where I worked for some time waiting. In fact, it really was to try to raise money for get a ticket back to go back home, because the scholarship didn't have tickets for even when you complete. So I went to a company which was called Philip, which was manufacturing radios in Pakistan for almost a year before I decided to get a ticket to go back to Rhodesia, then by ship. So because that was cheaper. So within that year I managed to raise enough money then to buy a ticket to travel from Pakistan to Beira by ship, and then from Beira then I got a plane to fly to Rhodesia at that time. Just when I got into Rhodesia then, I was now looking for a job. The first job that I got was in Supersonic. Supersonic was a company in Bulawayo manufacturing radios and televisions. So obviously my Pakistan experience was very helpful for them to want to have me. So I worked there also almost for a year as a radio manufacturing technician engineer. During that time, I did apply for a position. My real intention was to join the PTC because I wanted to be a telecom engineer. And then the opportunity came, they called me for an interview at the post office to come to interview me. I went in Bulawayo main post office where I was interviewed by two white gentlemen that were coming from Harare. And these white gentlemen, well, I was going to tell them that I was not working, but I don't know, for some reason, the Rhodesian system, they had already investigated me. They already knew that I was working at a company called Supersonic. Luckily, they did mention that, no, but you are working now at Supersonic. Why do you want to leave? Well, I said I wanted to be a telecom engineer. It had much more impact in the society than what I was doing there at Supersonic. Yeah. So they told me then, okay, we're going to take you, but you have to go to Harare for training. At their college, their PTC college was in Harare. So they recruited me, and then I relocated now to Harare. In Harare, I spent 2 years in training at the PTC College of Telecommunications, and successfully joined the department in the post office, which was called the Transmission Division, where we're dealing with the telephone systems of the country. Then I became the principal engineer of a department. During that time, an opportunity came again for me to apply for a scholarship to go into a master's in Wales University in the UK. The reason why, actually, because almost most of the white engineers that we had at the PTC at that time were all British trained, and they valued the British training very highly compared to any other training from any other country. So you could feel the environment that actually, and unless you became a member of the British Engineers Council, which was based in UK, you would not be able to go very far. When I joined the PTC, first 2 years of training, I was at the college, and then when I was in the field, and since being the first black engineer to join the PTC, I wasn't as privileged as much as the white engineers that were joining the PTC at the time. So whenever there were jobs that they didn't want to do, they always sent me. And I was kicked around, and I was based in Mutare, I was based in Masvingo, in Harare itself, many areas in the external plan. But this became an advantage, actually, for me, because I learned the setup of the telephone network in Rhodesia at the time very well because of this. And yet, at the beginning, I thought probably they were really being very unfair to me in quite a lot of places where they were used to send me, which they never used to send any white engineers. So anyway, I think basically this where I went to, I applied for unpaid leave there to go back to college. That was before the starting of the company. I had gone to do masters at Cardiff University in Wales, and at that time I think I had got married. Now this lady is sitting here, and we had our first daughter, Dumi, was there. And so I went around October to UK to go and do my master's in engineering, and they followed me at the end of the year. Was it the end of the year or September? I don't remember. When I came back from Wales after completing my master's degree, Zimbabwe had become independent, and I rejoined the PTC as an engineer. So then I continued, and the promotion level, then now I became the member of Institute of Electrical Engineers in UK, which made it much, much easier for me to get promotion within the PTC. So I became the principal engineer, and then from there I became the director of operation, now in charge of the whole telecommunication network in the country. That's where then I was there for quite some time, I think about 4 or 5 years as the director telecom at PTC. And that is the time when actually, during that time, one of my cousins was working, she was a secretary to the general manager of a company called Old Mutual. So I met this gentleman. We were talking about what I was doing. That I was the director of operations in telephone systems in the country. He said, look, he said, why don't you apply to us, because we are looking for people who will come as managers in TA division, TA Industrial. TA company was one of the biggest companies in Rhodesia at the time. It had about more than 100 companies. So I went for an interview at TA. They offered me a job of a general manager, TA Industrial, to manufacture refrigerators, domestic and commercial refrigerators. I became the general manager of that company for 2 years. It was during those 2 years that I was inspired to want to be a business person. And in those 2 years, that's when the company Telecontract was formed. And the idea of forming up the company Telecontract was to go back and do work, because PTC had started now contracting out some of its jobs to independent companies. So they were going to be having tenders that were out. So I formed this company, Telecontract, and it tendered for jobs for the PTC, and I was awarded contracts to do construction of telephone overhead lines in a number of regions in both Mashonaland, Matabeleland, and Midlands. So that is where the beginning of my business career. My wife didn't want to ask to, but we tendered for the PTC tenders, and we got the tender, but the question was we didn't have money to to go and undertake this work. So what we had to do actually, because during the time when I was working for the PTC, we had purchased the house in Vainona, and to me also had moved to a school. We had moved to a school nearby, and now we didn't have money, so we had to sell this house to try to get capital to equip the company, the various uniforms, tents that were required for people that are going to be staying in the rural areas there. So we sold our house. Initially, she didn't want to, but eventually, after a lot of discussion, the family, she eventually agreed to that. No, maybe that is the only option that we've got. We'll sell the house, purchase the equipment for the business to continue, and then the balance we're going to go and deposit another house. That's exactly what actually happened. So we went and deposited another house in one part of Harare, while we're still staying in this other house that we had just sold. At that time, actually, there were very, very few. There were business owners, but in different type of things, partly operators and so on. But at least in the engineering point of view, there weren't really any other business owners that one could learn from, who could learn what was going on. So, but we're just learning on the job. So at TA, we got these contracts, and the company started now trying to implement the projects that PTC had given us, and it needed supervision. My wife came to manage the company while I was still continuing with my TA job. So we had the office somewhere in town in Harare, and she agreed to volunteer to leave her job. Well, we're not sure whether that venture was going to actually be worthy while it was successful. So we still had to see exactly. But the volume of work was becoming so incredible, quite a lot. She was in the office, but the people that were being supervised were in the districts in different parts of the country, and they needed supervision. So when we started, actually, the company registered 91, got jobs from PTC, and actually it became actually a boom. We got contracts in almost all the 5 regional areas of the PTC, and the growth was phenomenal at that time. And it was quite a good time. In the early 2000s, and we started having actually financial problems. The company, the Zimbabwe dollar was falling, and the revenues were now sinking. And but Telecontract, even despite those problems, Telecontract survived through the turbulent years. What we did also was one of those things, is that we went to outside the regional countries here in South Africa. We came here in South Africa, and I don't remember exactly the exact year. We set up an internet cafe in Sandton Center. Our first internet cafe was at the Zimex Mall in Harare, and in Bulawayo, in these 2 areas. So when the jobs at the PTC now were becoming less and less and less, for us to survive now, we had to look for other areas where we could use our skills. We set up internet cafes in Harare, Zimex Mall, Bulawayo, Maswingo, and also the other places where we could operate internet cafe. Tel1, PTC then had just brought internet into the country. And we became the agent for distribution of that internet in various areas. So we set up those. That was quite a good experience for us. And then we started now looking outside also to enhance our survival tactics. We came here in South Africa, we set up an office at the Sandton Center, and we started operating an internet cafe which was purely targeting towards visitors in South Africa. South Africa had a lot of tourists. Sandton Center had a lot of tourists. So, because I remember that the branch here at that time started doing as much as, if you translate it, Zimbabwe dollar was very low now. The Sandton City Center Internet Cafe was making just as much money as the whole of telecontract if you convert it into rands. All my children were not interested in joining the telecontract at the time, and I used to tell them stories about what I saw in Pakistan, how the Indians families grow businesses as a family and the children take over, but that wasn't impressive to them. They wanted to go and make up their own career. Somewhere along the way, they started coming in, getting interested, and it was really God is working. I can't say how it happened, and they started getting interested, and all of them ended up in the company. Well, it was quite good for me, and because you see, when I started Telecontract, I started with my brother of mine who is late now, David Bwanya, and his children are now also with the company, and they all have stuck. We've trained a lot of people in telecontract, in the telecommunication industry, and the internet businesses, who have all come in. They spend years into telecontract, they leave, but my children have stuck on, including my brother's children. One is called Dawanda Bwanya and Chaga Bwanya. They've stayed with me, although their father is long gone, but they've stuck with the telecontract up to today. What I wish for the future of the business is that maybe the children take it as much as they can, and maybe my grandchildren also they can, because one of the things that we did in Zimbabwe today is creation jobs that our children can have an opportunity to work for themselves, for their fulfillment, and I think we've left a background for them. The company Telecontract is a background for them to come and practice their skills and try to grow it up. Now the children actually are bringing their own visions as well. And you see, there are many, I do help, do advise, but there are many issues that they are bringing in, and you really get impressed when you see the amount of effort, the amount of ideas they come, particularly around the area of service, sort of service performance, and they are doing very well. I think the opportunity for the company to grow, the children obviously are with it. And the thing, what we did, Telecontract was one of the first company to operate a voice over the internet platform in Zimbabwe. And now Telecontract has gone into solar and is driving the solar campaign quite vigorously. And as you know, the problem of power in our country is a very fundamental issue. And the Telecontract is going to be making a mark on this problem of electricity to many of the areas that, many of the houses, new houses that are being built in both Harare and the other parts of the country. Obviously, the company is now more than just a telecom company. We are now pioneering in the power, in the telephone. Well, telephone, yes. Voice over the internet. We pioneered that, and Telecontact was one of the first companies in Zimbabwe to do voice over the internet. And also now Telecontact is pioneered into solar systems, and is keeping up with technology to ensure that we don't get out of debt. We keep ahead. We're moving to new areas that are coming up, and the children seem to be tuned to it.